Alright, in this section of our tutorial, we are going to talk about the basic of Unity editor. Alright, so we're going to talk about each of these sections that you can see currently in my screen, and we're going to try to understand that what each of the windows does. Okay, so let's get started. Alright, so let's start from the left. In here you can see something called hierarchy. So basically everything in Unity is basically a game object, right? So when you put something inside Unity, that becomes a game object itself, and all the things that you put inside Unity has a reference in here. For example, if I now expand this, I can see there is a main camera. Alright, and we can see a camera icon in the middle of our screen. So that means we have currently only one game object in our game, that is the main camera. If I now try to right click in any of the space in the hierarchy, I can see there is a lots of option. I can go to 3D object or 2D object, and I can actually create one. I can go to sprite, and then I can create a square, right? So now in the middle of our screen there is a square. We can like move it by using our mouse, and I'll talk more about all the tools that comes with this transformations, but the main thing to notice here is that this game objects has some property in the right. All right, in here in the right hand side we can see something called an inspector. So hierarchy is basically where you have a reference for all the objects inside your game, and then this inspector gives you the properties of that particular object. So currently the square is selected, so you can see the square has two particular component. The first component in the square is a transform. The second component in the square is a sprite renderer. So as we move on and as we add more component to this object, we can use this add component button to add more component. We can basically make this object a particular thing. Alright, so for example, this square is currently just an image which has a transform and a sprite renderer. So it has a look, and it has some sort of position, rotation, and scale. It doesn't do anything. If we take another example, if we look into the main camera has two components, transform and the camera. Now, and it also has another one, audio listener. Now again, this camera is also a game object, and this is a special sort of game object which is a main camera, right? So basically all the component that we add to a game object is basically the representation of that particular object. Now as we move forward, we're going to see that we can use these components to basically determine the properties of a game object, right? So what have we learned till now is, first, everything in Unity is a game object. Number two, we have hierarchy, which can store all the game objects, and we have inspector, which basically shows us the property of each game object, right? Awesome. What's next? The next part in our editor is a scene window. You can see in the middle of our screen there is this scene window. All right, and in the scene window you can see there is a small some sort of preview. So basically currently we are selecting the main camera, and when we select the main camera is basically just like an eye for the game engine, right? So everything that the main camera can see is basically going to be the output of your game. the main camera can currently see only one game object in the left corner, so that is what the preview shows us here. But another thing to notice here is that we can also see our square, right? So everything that we add in here has a visual representation, or maybe there is no visual representation. No matter what, that object is also been reflected inside our scene window. The scene window is the place where we basically edit our game, right? So for example, if we add a new 2D object, sprite circle, that also can be placed inside the scene, right? And as you add these components in the scene, we can basically use a few tools to modify their size, their position, their rotation, and so on and so forth. So let's look into a few examples. I'm going to create another one. I'm going to create a 2D object, sprites, and I am going to create a capsule. So we have now 3 different objects. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a sort of shape with these 3 objects. All right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the first one, this capsule, and I want to place it somewhere in the middle. So I'm going to put it here. Now how am I doing it? Well, so that gives us the next tools that Unity provides. In the top corner of your screen, there is a few tools, right? The first one is a hand tool. If I use my middle mouse, or if I click on here, you can see I can pan this the screen, right? So that is what the first tool does. It helps you to pan the whole viewport. All right. What is the next one? The next one gives you the control to move your game object in a particular place in the screen. You can either go in up direction using the up arrow, or you can go to right direction using the right arrow, or if you click on the center and try to move this, you can move the object as well. Now there is a few little trick I want to mention here. If you hold shift and then move, then it actually gives you a constant constant movement. Actually this is not much applicable when movement, but if I now move on to the scaling part, which is the fourth one, and now if I try to, actually not the fourth, 1 2 3 4 5, the fifth one, if I now hold shift and try to scale it, you can see it's getting scaled in all directions, right? Okay, so yeah, let's get back to our move tool. Again, move tool helps us to move objects, and if we hold control, you can see that the movement is basically snapping, right? So if you want a precise movement for each grid, then you can use this as well. For this purpose, I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to make the position to 0 0 0 using the right top corner in our screen. There is a transform. If we use this position to 0 0 0, we can also change the positions of this particular game object. All right. So yeah, let's try with some other tools. The third one is rotation. Simple. We can use this to rotate our game object. We can do the same thing by using this rotation tool, right? So we can use these values to rotate our game object. So for example, if I change the Z with 60, I can see my game object has rotated with a 60-degree angle. All right, what is the next one? The next one is scaling. We can again scale it in a particular direction, or we can scale it as a whole by holding the center and then dragging our mouse. For a 2D game, we are going to use the fifth tool the most. This is the rect tool. So the rect tool has all the components that we just covered. It has the movement. You can simply hold your shift, and then if you move, hold your shift, and let's select the capsule first, and then if you hold shift, I'm moving left to right, you can see it snaps the position, right? No matter how I move my mouse, as far as I'm moving a little bit left to right, it's always snaps the position to left and right. Same goes for up and down. If I now move this object and hold shift, it's always going to snap it to up and down. Next, we can scale it. We already mentioned it, but again, if you hold shift, the scale should be uniform. So that means the scale should be applied to all the four axes, all the four direction, right? So that is really helpful because sometimes you don't want to squeeze your object. You want to scale it uniformly in all the direction. So shift is your friend. Hold shift and then move your mouse by clicking on this edge, and you'll see it's scaling up and down in all the directions. Next is rotation. If I just hover my mouse just outside this rect in any of this corner, I can see my cursor has got changed, right? Now if I move my mouse now, you'll see we have this rotation. Now this can be a little bit confusing for the beginners at the when you're starting Unity, right? Because you might not figure out which suitable spot you need to hover your mouse. Just put your mouse just a little bit outside of this rectangle and you'll see this tool. All right. Okay, so yeah, again with shift I can scale it down uniformly in all direction. And now I am just going to use the last one, which is all these tools combined together, right? Move, rotate, scale, selected object. So if I click on that, and then you can see that all these controls are now being applied in this one single tool. We are not going to use this much, so I'm not going to talk much about it. Let's move on to the rect tool, and this is the most important tool that you're going to use when we are making a 2D game. All right, so I really encourage you to practice a little bit with all these controls, make yourself familiar with all these controls, and then it will be easy for you to grab in the next phases where we design our levels and so on and so forth. All right, so let's create a few things here. I'm just going to drag and drop. I'm just going to drag it here. Now there's a few controls in Unity which is really handy when you are developing big game, big levels. One of them is duplicating the object, right? So for example, if I want to duplicate the square, I can click on this, and if I press Ctrl and D, it is going to just copy another square and place it just beneath the hierarchy. And you can hold the control, hold control or alt. Yeah, shift, my bad. So control shift, and then if you move this rectangle, you can always maintain the same line, right? So you don't move the rectangle a little bit up or down. I can do the same for this guy. I'm going to move it a little bit left and then move it here. I'm going to copy the square twice, and then we're just going to move it here, move this one, maybe delete this, duplicate the other one. All right, so now we can basically rotate it by clicking, hovering our mouse here and then rotate this. Same for this one. And now as you can see, we wanted to rotate this based on the this point, right? How can we do that? Now there is a small thing called anchor that we're going to talk about later, which is basically going to help us to rotate or scale something based on a particular point. So we need to change the anchor or the pivot of a particular sprite, and then we can manipulate it that way. For now, we're just going to use this manually. So now we have some sort of a human. All right, so yeah, so what else we can actually change these names as well. So if I like right click on this and hold click rename, I can change the name with maybe left hand. All right, and so on. The next part is really important, which is the game view. So now if I click on this small icon here in the top here, you can see there is an option called game, right? So if I click on there, you can see that the changes that we made in our scene has been reflected here, and this is the actual thing that the player will see. If we hit play, again play is in the top here. So if you play, this is the scene that the player is going to see. All right, now what I prefer is to put this game and the scene window side by side, so you know the things that you're editing in the same time when you are editing it, right? So when you are editing your game, you can also see what it's going to look like as an end result. So I really prefer, and I also recommend everyone to put the game window and the scene window side by side. One way of doing it is simply dragging and dropping this thing. If you just, I'm just going to do it again. If you hover on the game and click it and then start dragging it, you can see when you move it a little bit right, it's going to snap. And if I drop, it's going to snap it in there. All right, so this is one way of doing it, but I don't like this way for a couple of reasons. Because first of all, it takes a lot of space, and we are not using a lot of space in the down here. So what I want to do, I want to use something called a layout, right? So I'm going to use a different sort of layout of Unity, so that I can see both my scene window and the game window at the same time, and also all the other controls are, you know, in a more controllable way. So yeah, so let's do that. So in the right top corner of your screen, oops, not this, in here there's three options: account, layers, and default. So that we want to change this one. Okay, so click on there, and there is a 2x3 layout, and check that, and this is how it should look like. So now we can see our scene in the top and the result, our game, in the bottom left. All right, if you by any chance don't see this, you can always like manually do it by your own. I'm going to show that as well. Let's get back to default, and then what I want you to do is basically move this hierarchy to the right, and then you can move this game in the down, the project in the left, in the right again, just after hierarchy, and that's it. Oh, the console should not be here, the console should be below there. And yeah, that's all about it. You can actually delete this if you don't want for now. And yeah, so this is the exact layout that we have been using just a few seconds earlier, and you can save it by clicking save layout. All right, or if you don't like the layout that I'm using, you can use your own layout by simply dragging all these panels here and there. All right, but I always prefer to use 2x3 because I think this is a really good standard in game development community, and it helps you to see both your scene window and the game window in the same time. All right, so the last thing that I like to do is right click on my project, and I want the one column layout. All right, so this gives me a more clean look, and there is not a lot of information. All right, so let's revise all the stuff that we have been talking since now. Number one, we have talked about that everything in Unity is a game object. So when we add something inside our game, that becomes a game object, and that game object is being reflected in the scene and the game and also in the hierarchy. All right. Next, we have talked about inspector. So we have talked about if we click on each of these game objects from our hierarchy, we can see their property in our inspector in the right hand side of our screen. All right, and each of these components basically giving some property to this game object to make it a particular entity. All right, so is it a sprite, is it a sound, is it a camera, what sort of game object it is it a player, is it an enemy, what sort of game object this is. All these property are being derived by these components, and in the future classes we are going to create our own component which we call scripts. All right, okay, final thing, when we want to add something in our game, we basically add them into the project, right? So when we add anything into the project, that goes in here. Sorry. Yeah. All right, so let's see one example. If say I want to import a few sprite in my game, how can I do that? Well, there is a few way of doing it. One way of doing it is simply by right-clicking on the asset, and then we're going to do import new asset, and then we need to browse to the asset that we want to use, right? For example, if I am if I go to my desktop and find some sort of image, I can click on import, and then it will be imported inside Unity. That is one way of doing it. All right, but this way I don't like this way because this is kind of time consuming. Into every time you need to go there and browse the asset. Not a good way of doing it. So another way of doing it is basically simply dragging and dropping the asset. So for example, I have this ships.png, right? So I can drag and drop it inside my assets folder, and that's it. It's going to be imported directly to my game engine, Unity. All right, and we can simply use that sprite by simply dragging and dropping it inside Unity. We're going to talk about that in the coming lectures, so let's not bother about that just yet. But this assets folder is basically going to be the source of all the assets that we are going to use into our game, whether it's a sound, whether it's an animation, whether it's sort of a sprite, no matter what that is that we are going to use inside our game, right? When we are going to first import that inside this asset folder, and when we save our scene, or when we save an animation, or for example when we save some sort of camera clip, some raw textures, everything that we try to save should be saved inside the asset folder. All right, nice. And now that we have some sort of idea about Unity, let's close this lecture in here, and in the next lecture we are going to talk about how can we save our project and what a scene is, and how can we start working on a new scene to start our new game of space shooting. All right, so I'll see you in the next lecture.